On the 21st of April, 2013, I was called in to interrogate an unknown person of interest. I was briefed on a government flight from Chicago to some middle-of-nowhere town in Minnesota. The person I was about to speak to was a mystery. There was no identification, and there were no records of anyone like this person living anywhere near the location where they were found. None of the locals had ever seen them, and they hadn't been caught on any cameras. It's like they appeared out of nowhere. What caught the interest of my employer was the fact that this person was found covered in blood and gore, but were themselves unharmed. The moment I stepped off the tarmac, I had a suit next to me trying to give some context about recent developments. For the first 36 hours, he didn't say a word. The suit explained. They couldn't get him to focus on anything. Blood tests show he wasn't exposed to narcotics or toxins. Have you found the victims? Not yet, he sighed. But there seem to be multiple. We haven't got a DNA match on anything yet. They're double-checking the results. Something went wrong with the testing. Alright, I said. Good start, but I need something to work with. The suit waved over a man with a briefcase and an umbrella. The air was damp, and we were heading for rough weather. There were already little puddles in the asphalt. The suit kept the briefcase, but handed me the umbrella. I sat down in the back of a small black sedan. The briefcase contained some early tests and observations. They had done some intelligent assessment, handing the stranger various puzzles. He passed with ease. Doctors figured he'd been exposed to some kind of trauma, and that perhaps his odd behavior was a result of a dissociative episode. Why is he so interesting to begin with? I asked. I'm not seeing it. He was flagged by the DUC. Something about proximity to objects related to national security interests. What objects? No idea. So you don't know what makes him interesting? That's not my job, sir. We pulled up outside a small concrete building, window slits shielded with rebar and bulletproof glass. If you didn't know about this place, you could never anticipate its location. It was just this gray spot in the middle of a verdant forest, a stark contrast to the pine trees brushing up against each other with the sway of the rising wind. One more thing, the suit said as he leaned out of the passenger seat. We call him David. Why David? In the hospital, he just watched nature documentaries. David Attenborough, that kind of thing. It just caught on. Nature documentaries. That was something I could work with. I went through a checkpoint, leaving my umbrella, ballpoint pen, cell phone, and identification. I was led down a corridor into an eggshell beige concrete room, one without a window slit. It was about 12 by 14 feet, but with a ceiling that reached almost 24 feet, where a single light hung overhead. I couldn't help but wonder how they changed it. The door clanked open, and I saw David for the first time. He was dressed in a white t-shirt and blue sweatpants, white socks, and blue Crocs. He had some marks on his wrists, indicating he might have worn shackles until recently. But he surprised me. I'd had this picture of having a raving lunatic in mind with hair standing out in all directions. David was nothing like that. He was in his early 20s with a trimmed side-part haircut, athletic, shaved, and not a hint of scars or scratches. This was someone I could see enter a boardroom. I couldn't imagine him running around naked in the forest. Have a seat, I said. David looked at me and shook his head. I do not want it. I mean, I'd like you to sit down, I explained. Is that acceptable? Yes. He pulled out a chair and sat down across from me. I noticed his eyes shifting across the room, as if looking for something. I was just about to ease him into a conversation when he spoke up. There are 20 fingers in this room, he said. Yes, there are, I agreed. Why do you say that? Establishing certainties, he explained. Undisputable facts. Is 20 fingers not a given, since there are 2 of us? Statistically, the average person has less than 10 fingers. It is more common to lose a finger than to be born with multiple. That's true, I nodded. But with that reasoning, the average person has less than 2 eyes. Why bring up the fingers? It is more common to lose fingers. Probability, I said. Is that an interest of yours? David didn't respond. He was counting something, watching the walls. According to what I'd read in his files, David had only briefly spoken to others, and usually about nonsensical things. But I got the impression that he was just thinking about things that we hadn't considered. His statements might seem random, but there was a method to his madness. I had to take that into consideration. You're very attentive, I said. You seem to be alert. You seem inattentive, he responded. Unbothered. Perhaps we just view things in different ways. Is there anything that worries you? No, he said, shaking his head. Nothing. Then perhaps you wouldn't mind answering some questions about yourself. I would not mind. They've tried asking you questions before, I added. How come you're only speaking up now? David turned his head to the side, letting his eyes flicker from me, then back to various spots on the wall. He shook his head again. I did not know the language. I first asked him about his real name. He didn't understand the question. I told him my name and explained that I needed a name in return so I knew what to call him. We finally settled on making David his official name. Not that he needed one. I tried asking him how it was possible for him not to have a name. In all my life, I'd never met a child that hadn't been named. David explained that where he came from, having a name was too confusing, which brought me into a peculiar line of questioning. So let's talk about where you're from, I said. You don't seem to be from around here. I do not know if it is around here, he said. It is not a single location. Your parents moved around a lot? Hard to tell. Sometimes we moved. Sometimes we were moved. Sometimes things moved around us. I don't understand. It's hard to explain to someone who's never seen it. Seen what exactly? David leaned over the middle of the table and pointed his finger straight down. Where am I pointing? He asked. To the middle of the table. That is one answer. I am also pointing at the floor. That is another relation. I am also pointing at the ground. There is sediment under there. Bedrock. If considering the other side of the world, I might be pointing at the ocean, or a particular fish. He looked me in the eye. They had a strange, almost synthetic color. So I ask you, he said, where am I pointing? Only you could know. Yes, we can try to understand from context or intent, but the truth of the matter could be anything. So when you ask me where I am from, there is not a singular answer. It is more of a concept. A person can't be born from a concept. No, but they can be born without one. David leaned back in his chair and named a couple more certainties that he could observe. The length of the room, the height, the number of legs on all combined chairs and tables. Certainties. It seemed to soothe him, somehow, to know that some things were undisputed. I was born in a place where time works differently, he said. Where a second can be a year can be a second. It can go backwards, forwards, simultaneously. I have a hard time believing that. It is an unusual environment, he said. Here, life is linear, simple. You can plan ahead. And you couldn't? Say I plan on eating, he said. But when I find my prey, I might have already eaten, or the prey has been dead for decades, or I might see myself already eating prey and must fight myself for a piece. I can't imagine living like that. Sounds like a nightmare. You need to navigate probability, David explained. The most likely result. And if you wish for a particular outcome, you start to look at the most probable way to get there. That is how you adapt, evolve. I looked him up and down. I asked if he wanted a coffee, and after a solid minute of consideration, he declined. I went outside for a moment to talk with the others and scarf down a sandwich. A colleague of mine was in the break room, watching the interrogation from a security camera. "He thinks he's a time traveler," he said. "He's completely lost it." "I don't know what to make of it," I said. "But I wouldn't be surprised if he killed someone. That reminds me, we got the blood work, but you're not gonna like it." He handed me a file. Pictures, data, statistics, and a little explanation in the far back. Most of the blood was from a mix of animals, mostly mammals, but also part reptile, maybe even insectoid. "How many gophers do you have to kill to get yourself covered in blood?" my colleague asked. "He has to be crazy." "Maybe," I muttered. "But I want to keep talking." I went back inside. I asked David about his parents. He didn't have a lot to say. In a world with uncertain time, a person could be one or many things. His mother was described as a beautiful saint, a horrifying monster, as two twins carrying the same child. His mother was, in the infinity of things, every mother. And with that line of thought, "I'm guessing you didn't call her anything?" I said. "She did not nurture me. The land did not allow it," he said. "She is Lilia, mother." "So in your world, where you're from, nothing can be a certainty. How do you survive in an environment like that?" David considered this. His eyes stopped shifting for a while. "Consider the salmon." I almost lost it. Out of all the things I'd expected him to say, that wasn't one of them. "The salmon swims upstream, breeds, and dies. It is an effort for something that is, essentially, instinct. It does not know why it is doing it, but it is the best thing for the salmon as a species." "I suppose, yes." "That is how you survive. You let yourself be led forward by what is most true to your nature. That is how you improve, and how you become what you need to be." "Is that how you became who you are? By just going along with what needs to happen?" "I am the best version of me that there is," he said. "I am the strongest, the smartest, the quickest. That is a fact. I am the version of me that swam all the way up the stream. You're the salmon that made it. You have to swim with the stream," he said, "and you have to trust that it takes you where you need to go." The more I talked to David, the more I got an insight of his worldview. Where he came from, there were infinite possibilities, and an infinite passage of time. To survive, he would have to be the best version of himself, and learn to navigate the strands of chance. He never said it outright, but there was an implication that there were others like him, and versions of himself that didn't make it. And his mother? Well, she was a mystery. This was his explanation for being the way he was. He was the best version of himself because he needed to be. It challenged me to consider what I would have looked like as a David. What was my best year? When I was at my smartest, strongest, and fastest? Could have been 20 years ago. It was hard to tell. But at my best, I might very well have looked like David. But even then, we were never anything alike. I couldn't help but get an eerie feeling about him. There was something alien about his demeanor. His fascination with probability and chance seemed so calculated. He was emotionless to the point of psychopathy. But maybe that was necessary? Before we finished up for the day, David held up a hand. "I am not used to talking to others," he said. "I wanted to see if I can make you understand." "I'd like to try," I said. "What do you have in mind?" "Pay attention to your right knee," he said. "That is the most probable way for you to change your outcome." "And how could you possibly know that?" "I can see. Navigate," he explained. "That is how I survive." I said goodbye to David and was escorted out of the building. My things were given back to me, including the umbrella. There was a second location, about a 10-minute walk southward, where personnel were supposed to stay the night. I wasn't given an escort. It was a straight walk, and the entire area was fenced off. If I looked closely, I could even see armed guards walking the perimeter. The rain had come and gone, leaving a mild trickle that muddled the ground. I followed a dirt road, thinking about what David had said. I had a hard time imagining a place where time wasn't linear, and to grow up in an environment like that didn't make sense. I tried to figure out what his real issue might be. While his tox screen came back negative, and he'd been under close observation for days, it was hard for me to say that we weren't just playing along with a madman. A drop of rain poked me in the eye, making me stop. I wiped my eyes and groaned. "Consider your right knee," he'd said. But why? There was nothing wrong with it. Sure, I wasn't the track star I'd been in my youth, but I was as healthy as ever. I looked down. If I hadn't looked at my knee, I would have missed what was right in front of me. It barely stood out on the muddy path, but there was a timber rattlesnake slowly making its way across the road. The extra second it took for me to stop and hesitate had made me look down and spot it. It was large too, probably the largest snake I'd ever seen. Instead of me stepping on it or provoking it, it just made its way across the road and disappeared into the forest, leaving me questioning everything I'd heard up until that point. When I went to bed that night, I kept wondering about the many things that David had said, how he was the salmon that made it upstream, that you had to trust in the process and go with the flow, to embrace what was natural to your environment and being. I thought back on my own life, considering how that mindset would have changed things. Maybe I would have acknowledged the feelings I had for Miley back in high school before she asked another guy to prom. Maybe I would have pursued another kind of education or lived in a different country. Maybe if I'd accepted my needs and wants instead of pushing against them, I too would be the best version of myself. It made me wonder just how many rattlesnakes I'd stepped on over the years. So when I went back to David the next day, I did so with a lot of questions. It could still just be one long coincidence. He could still be a madman, but he was a madman who'd make me think, and that intrigued me. The next time I was face to face with David in that concrete room, I tried to make some small talk. I asked him about how he'd slept and what he'd had for breakfast. He didn't understand the question. He hadn't slept, and he hadn't eaten. That was apparently something he didn't understand. I pressed on with other questions. "Why did you want me to pay attention to my right knee?" I asked. "To increase the probability of a different outcome," he said, "as I told you." "But I don't understand how you can know this," I said. "It's impossible." "You see things in a linear way. I consider as many words as I can, and I pick the ones who resonate with the outcome I want. The same goes for actions and things I perceive." "So let's say you wanted to win the lottery," I said. "You could just pick the numbers that are most likely to win." "I do not know who lottery is." "I see." David stretched a little and looked back up at the wall. He made a few more statements, seemingly to no one. The material of the walls, the texture of his clothes, declarative statements of things that were certain. "So let's talk about how you got here," I said. "No one has seen you around, and no one saw you arrive." "I followed the flowers," he said. "The blue sunflowers. They are small constants, like breadcrumbs. Once you are strong enough to follow them, they lead you here." "Sunflowers, huh? Never seen a blue one before." "They are a certainty." "I see. What a peculiar feature." It was a long journey. I had to go through many changes to make it here. "What kind of changes?" I asked. David looked down at his hand, stretching out his fingers. They didn't have a scratch on them. Smooth, dainty. "I will put it into simple words," he said. "Why does the salmon swim upstream?" "So it can mate, have children," I said. "Yes, but that is for the benefit of another being, another generation. It does not benefit the singular salmon." "But if it didn't, there'd be no salmon," I said. "So it has to." "So it does something because it is compelled, and in doing so, it succeeds. Now imagine there is only one salmon, that it gives birth to itself, an unending cycle of swimming, birthing, dying. Sounds meaningless, I said. Is that how you perceive life to be? Not at all, David said. Because there will be new salmon. They will be better and faster swimmers. In 1,000 years, they might not die upstream. In 1,000,000 years, they might not even be salmon. So to you, perspective is different. You consider not just long-term effects, but effects that won't matter for thousands of lifetimes. Yes, David nodded. Everything we do for a purpose that is unknown to us. And yet, we swim up that stream, I said, and we die there so our children can live. He sat back down, nodding. He seemed pleased with himself, as if he'd made me understand. His perspective was inhuman, to say the least. It was one thing to consider your actions in the context of your future self or your future children, but he was talking about 1,000,000 generations from now. It made me question what kind of man I was really talking to. How many times have you tried swimming up that stream, David? Innumerable. So how come you look so put together? Have you stayed a salmon, so to speak? No, there are numerous changes, he said. I thought that was obvious. Can you give me an example? He considered my request and got up from his chair. He stepped past me and approached the door. It was locked and bolted from the outside. He slapped it firmly with his hand, and I could hear a click. Then the door swung open. It wasn't supposed to do that. David! He stepped out into the hallway. 2 guards intercepted him, holding up their hands and asking him to stop. One of them pulled a taser. When David didn't stop, they fired, only for the taser to misfire and crackle. The guard dropped it. David turned to me. I am perfectly safe, he said. It is improbable that they would wound me. David, I understand your point, but you need to come back here. You wanted to see changes. Let me show you. David stepped up to one of the guards. They dropped their taser and pulled out a handgun. The gun jammed, and with the flick of his wrist, David smashed it out of his hands. He unjammed the handgun in a casual motion, like he'd done it 1,000,000 times. This is how we differ. Then he put the gun to his head and fired. My ears rang so loud that I didn't hear his body hit the floor. The facility erupted, red lights on the walls, blaring alarms. Someone covered me with a fire blanket, screaming at me to keep my head down. No shots were fired, but in the corner of my eye, I could see David's lifeless body on the floor, blood soaking into his blue Crocs. We were all moved outside and asked to proceed to our chambers. A long shaky walk through the mud. No rattlesnakes this time. Everyone was locked in their rooms overnight. No updates, no explanations. Just a small room with a single bedside table lamp and a whole lot of questions. It had happened so fast. What was David trying to prove? I'd just gotten ready for bed when there was a knock on my door. I wrapped myself in a blanket and got up. A colleague of mine stepped in, looking wide-eyed, panting. He's back, he said. He's asking for you. What do you mean? David, he said. David's back. I put my clothes on, chugged 2 cups of coffee, and made my way back to the interrogation room. David was already there, sitting across from me like nothing ever happened. The door shut behind me with a decisive clang. They were taking further precautions. More guards, more locks. David didn't seem to mind. He had new clothes. Another salmon swims upstream. Another salmon ends, he said. You died, I said, stifling a yawn. It's not possible. No, it is not probable, he said, but it is certainly possible. What happened to your body? How did you? I have adapted. David interrupted. I have evolved. You can't outrun death, I said. Death and time are fundamental to human experience. Why? There were so many answers. How we had built entire civilizations around passing things along. How we learn to live with the inevitable end of the self. Our society wouldn't survive without the fundamentals of time and death in place. But David couldn't grasp it, and for the first time as I looked into his eyes, I truly believed he was something else. He had gone beyond human, beyond humanity. He had become something else entirely, and there was no telling what he was capable of. I would continue to interview David for days. According to the doctors on site, he wasn't just dead. He left his body behind. It had shriveled up into a dry shell like a spider's mold. But a healthy copy of David had suddenly been standing in that room like nothing had happened. They showed me pictures. A contorted carcass snapped open like an egg. He'd died. And yet, there he was. David would talk about his experience growing up. To him, it made complete sense. He had died infinite times, done infinite things, but in a space where there was nothing but him in a harsh, deathless environment. He had fought countless instances of himself, trying to get better, faster and stronger. And through every generation, something would change. And with infinite time, in infinite variations, he had become something else entirely. He was a creature that had adapted to a timeless space. Perhaps he was born human, but what sat in front of me was something different. He saw things on a scale I couldn't imagine, and he could track the strands of possibility connecting to outcomes of his choosing, like a hound following a distant trace from a drop of sweat. There were talks about a physical limitation assessment. Some of the higher-ups wanted to kill him in different ways to see what would happen. Others wanted to use this in one way or another. Turns out his organs would mold and decay in less than a day after passing away, so he couldn't be used for harvesting healthy organs. These were the sort of discussions I would listen to in the break room as my talks with David continued. After about a week, I shifted to a more immediate topic: his arrival. "So you follow this trail of certainty," I said. "These things, flowers that are unflinching and unchanging." "Yes, I did." "Then what of the blood?" I asked. "What of it? Where did it come from? Did you hurt someone?" "Changing takes a lot of effort," he explained. "Sometimes you have to shed what you do not need." "Wait, so the blood was yours?" "It was, yes." I brought out the files and showed him the blood work we'd done, the various graphs and explanations. "This is rodent," I said, pointing to a chart. "And here, amphibian, possibly frog. 2 kinds of mammals. This isn't your blood." "It is." "But you're human. You're sitting in front of me as a human man." "I am, yes." "You're not a rat or a gopher. You're not a horse or a bear. So how come we are seeing a dozen different animals in what is supposedly your blood?" "It takes effort to adapt. You have to go through several phases and iterations. No creation is immediate perfection." David explained it as best he could. The form sitting in front of me had been painstakingly crafted through his journey to solid time. In his way of salmon logic, he explained it as swimming upstream over and over again, until he could finally find the legs to walk out of the river entirely. I just scratched my head and sunk my head into my hands. I was exhausted. David seemed nonplussed. I put the folder away with a shrug. "They thought you'd killed someone," I said. "That's why they captured you to begin with." "Captured?" he asked. "What do you mean?" "They took you in, brought you here." "I am not captured," he assured me. "I choose to be here." "Perhaps, but you were brought in as a prisoner, I'm sad to say." David stared at me without a word. He didn't blink. It occurred to me that, up until this point, he might not have understood that he was in fact a prisoner. He didn't understand the context. David got up from his chair and walked up to the door. I stepped back, giving him some space. "I will not be held against my will," he said. "I came here willingly." "We are not trying to maintain an adversarial position," I said. "I'm sure we can work something out." "Are you complicit?" he asked. "Are you my jailer?" "I was brought here to have a discussion," I said. "To learn. To better oppose me. That's not my intention. But it is the outcome." He looked me up and down. He was seeing something, and I noticed his demeanor shift. I was in danger. He grabbed his left hand and twisted it without a flinch, cracking it out of its socket. Then he did so again and again, causing bones and nerves to snap and separate. I could see his skin go from red to a sickly purple as he pulled the hand clean off and threw it into the corner of the room. The exposed bone of his arm twisted and spiraled, extending into a long spike. He lifted it towards me. I fell off my chair and crawled back. I could hear movements outside, but David wasn't attacking me. It was a show of force. Before I realized what he was doing, it was too late. They were opening the door. Previously, before they reinforced it, all he had to do was to knock the right gears out of alignment with a firm thwack. Now he had to make someone willingly open it from the outside. This was the best way to do so. It was calculated, probable. The moment the door flung open, all hell broke loose. Gunfire, blood spatter. In the flash from a gun muzzle, I saw a split-second view of a man with a bone spike plunged into his ear. David was taking a lot of damage, but he didn't seem to mind. The hand in the corner was still moving. It was such a stupid thing to pay attention to, but I couldn't help it. As David rampaged into the hallway, I curled up in the corner and hoped it would all pass. Parts of the hand seemed to come apart, like a wilting flower. Then it moved. Every joint of his fingers turned into a beetle, and the palm of his hand extended into a kind of skin-like starfish. The beetles were crawling up the walls and escaping through the door. The chaos outside was dying down. It had only been seconds. I looked into the hallway. The lights had turned red, making all the blood look like puddles of ink. 4 dead, 3 guards, and 1 of my colleagues. They didn't even look like people anymore, just contorted meat. David had taken a dozen gunshots and was leaning over one of the bodies. He plunged his healthy hand into it, and a second later, I could see something expanding through its chest. It was hard to see in the blinking red lights. Tendrils erupting from a corpse. They crawled across the floor, gathering meat into a pile, slowly shaping broken legs and torsos into a multifaceted creature. Something close to 9 feet tall, an amalgamation of features, none of which were human, but a silhouette. It faced David. They had an entire conversation without saying a word. David had been wounded, and his probabilities were imperfect. He'd failed. He'd swum upstream, and now he handed life off to another salmon, another him. So he too was ripped apart and consumed, leaving only part of his remaining arm behind. With every step closer to the outer doors, this creature began to look more human. It shed some features, emphasized others. It grew smaller, thinner, and softer, folding its wings into skin flaps on its back and breaking off its claws against the concrete walls. The final transformation was its mandibles being folded into its mouth, now lined with human lips. David had taken a new form. A woman this time. She spoke in a melodic voice. Red lights, cold floor, 1 witness, 65 fingers. She looked back at me, but did nothing. She observed the room quietly and turned her attention forward. She kept speaking as she rounded the corner. Do not forget your umbrella. It was improbable that I'd be a hindrance. There was no point in killing me. Perhaps it was even a detriment. Maybe David knew that leaving me alive would be a deterrence to others. Or maybe it was just another threat of probability to some unknown end. Last I saw of David, she stepped out of the main doors and disappeared into the night. As the warning lights died down, I was left alone in the dark, my wet feet with blood as panic ensued outside. I just stood there, hearing little things skitter, blood dripping from the ceiling, plopping into puddles. It wasn't until a flashlight shone at me, and someone screamed at me to get on my knees, that I snapped out of it. I was escorted out of the building. I grabbed the umbrella. Good thing I did. It was raining again. This was some time ago. I have never met or heard anything like David since. A boy born in a timeless space, having used the eons of time to pass himself into a form that could allow itself to leave. The universe is a big place. I often think about how small we are as a species. Everything we've ever known is on this one blue dot among untold trillions of dots. In the grand scale of things, we're insignificant. But that goes for time too. The passing of a single generation is nothing. And yet, it is absolutely essential. A single break in the chain, and it would be all over. Perhaps David is what the future holds for us as a species. Maybe that's what we need to be to survive. And over untold billions of years, who's to say that's not what we're going to be? So maybe we have to take a step back, just this once. Maybe we have to trust the process. And maybe we'll have to keep swimming upstream, no matter the cost. In case we do, I'm keeping my umbrella.